Hello, this is John from TC Math Academy, and in this video we're going to be talking about linear models. And of course, this is related to the topic of linear functions. This is a big topic in algebra, and anytime you hear the word linear, and I'm going to write it out for you, Linear, what we're talking about is lines, right? So graphing lines, writing the equations of lines. This is a real kind of basic skill that you learn in like first year algebra. But what I have here for you is a nice practice problem relating to the topic again of linear models. So I'm going to read you the problem. It's actually a three-part problem. It says to produce copies of a book, it costs $220.50 for setup and $4.90 per copy. So we want to answer three specific things here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to construct or write a linear model that relates the cost to produce books, the total cost to produce books, to the number of copies you want to make. Okay, so for example, if you wanted to make 75 copies, how much would that cost? And you want to construct a model, right, using algebra to kind of, have a general equation or formula for that describes the total cost of books to the number of copies that you want. Okay, so hopefully you understand that. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about here in a second. But again, this is what a linear model is. Now, there are a few different ways you could approach this. So you may do this correctly, but it may not be what I have. But I'll answer all this in a second. Now, the second part of this question is how much will it cost to produce 500 books? And then how many books, this is part C of this question, how many books can be made for $700, right? So if $700 is your budget to produce books, how many books could you produce? Okay, so again, pretty typical like first year algebra problem. If you want to pause the video and look at this problem and study it for a bit, it'll probably take you a minute or two to actually answer all three parts of this question. But if you could do this, go ahead and put your answers into the comment section. I'm going to show you the correct answers in just 1 second. And then we're going to obviously go through, the steps to solve this particular problem. And hopefully this is not going to be too difficult. But again, if you're at the Algebra 1 level or beyond, this is something that you should be able to handle. Also, if you need math help with the course you're taking, test prep, or homeschooling, make sure to check out my math help program at tcmathacademy.com. You can find a link to that in the description below. And if this video helps you out, don't forget to like and subscribe, as that definitely helps me out. Okay, so let's go and take a look at the answer. Again, we have this situation to produce copies of a book. It costs $220, $220.50 for initial setup, and then $4.90 per copy. We want to answer these three parts. A, we want to write a linear model that relates the total cost to produce a certain amount of books, and of course, it's to the number of copies that you want, right? So, given like 75 copies, how much is that total cost? We want to construct a formula, an equation. That is what a linear model is. The part B is how much to produce 500 books. So let's say, hey, you want to produce 500 books. How much is that going to? What's the total cost there? And then if your budget is $700, how many books can be made? Okay, so again, those are the problems. Let's go and take a look at the answers for A, B, and C. So here are the answers. So A is our linear model, and I'm using the variables y and x. And when we talk about linear, right, we're talking about a line. So you want to be thinking about y equals mx plus b. This is the probably the most common way for sure to construct linear models, right? So linear models are typically constructed using y equals mx plus b format, which is the slope-intercept form of a line. Now you could use a standard form, you could even do it, in different ways, but most algebra courses are going to have you kind of set up your models this way. So you should have something like this: y equals 4.9x plus 220.5. and y is the total cost of books, and x is the number of books you want to produce. I'll get into all this in more detail. And then part B of the problem is $2,670.50 for 50 cents. And then part C is 97 books. Okay, so if you have watched some of my previous videos on my YouTube channel, typically I just answer or ask one question and answer one question, but here this is a three-part question, so a little bit more work involved, but if you got all three of these right, that is fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and give you a nice little happy face, an A plus, a 100% for getting 3 out of 3, and multiple stars. You can tell your friends and family that indeed you are an expert when it comes to the topic of linear models, right? Linear functions. And this particular problem is a kind of good starter problem to review this topic. There's certainly much more challenging problems than this, but let's go ahead and get into it right now. Okay, so the first part of this problem is probably it's the most important part, and that is we want to write a linear model, okay, that relates the cost to produce books, the total cost to produce books. My kind of peed are a little bit there. It's a little bit better. So the total cost to produce books based upon the number of copies that we want. All right. So here, I apologize for these little kind of typos right here. But anyways, I'm pretty sure you understand what I'm talking about. So we want to write a linear model that relates these two things, right? So we're talking about a function, if you will. So let me kind of go up here and think about it, right? So we have like a function machine, okay? And you're like, okay, I want to produce a certain number of books, okay? I would like to, produce, let's say, 75 books. Okay, fine. You're going to put it into your little function machine, and then what comes out is going to be what you owe, right? The total cost, right? So this little machine is the concept of a function, right? It's a rule, right? And again, we are talking about functions, and a function is a rule, and typically you can kind of write it this way, f of x. Stylistically, there's different ways to do this, okay? And I'll kind of talk more about this in a second, but this is what the problem's asking. Write a mathematical model that will tell you the total cost of production based upon the number of books you want to order. Okay, so here you kind of have you have a good amount of latitude, but you're going to have to pick two variables. Okay, one for the total cost and another variable for the number of books. And as I indicated previously, you want to write linear models using y equals mx plus b. Okay, the slope-intercept form, because you could graph this. So let me just kind of go up here real quick and set this up for you because this is important. Okay, so let me just erase all this. There's a couple things you want to keep in mind when you're writing linear models. You have the x-axis and y-axis, because you could graph linear models. You could construct linear models from scatter plots and all kinds of different data. If you're already kind of lost, I'm going to suggest that you check out any one of my algebra courses, Algebra 1 and beyond. I'll leave the links to all my courses in the description. But basically, here we have an XY model. We have independent and dependent variable, right? So you can kind of think of a function like y. Well, let me write a line, equation of a line. Y equals mx plus b, okay, or f of x is equal to mx plus b. All right, so this is a linear function. This is a linear equation. And again, we're talking about lines that can be graphed on the xy plane. So in this case, if x is our input variable, right? So we're thinking about a function. This is our independent or input variable, or independent variable, and y is our dependent variable. So what is, one way we want to think about this particular situation? So our input is the number of books, right, we want to produce, okay? And then our output variable, okay, which of course would be our y variable right here, is the cost of doing so, okay, in dollars, right? So x will represent the number of books, and y would be in dollars, right? The total cost in dollars. So you have to be specific about this. And again, different ways you can do this, but I'm kind of trying to keep it simple for this particular example. So let's go ahead again and think about y equals mx plus b. So what's kind of the input? Well, the input is going to be the number of books we want to, the number of copies that we like to have. So that'll be x, and y will be how much it's going to cost us. Okay. Now, when we're thinking about this, you have to say, well, before we even, get to produce, even like one book, right? We're going to have to set, or we're going to have to pay this $220.50 as a setup. That's a one-time fee, and then it's just $4.90 per copy. So we can kind of construct a nice model like this. So y equals 4.9x plus 220.5. So we're going to have to pay this amount right here as an initial one-time fee, and then 4.9, kind of course, which is using numbers here and not dollars, but it means the same thing. So we have 4.9x. So x would be what? It represents, again, the number of books. So if we wanted to produce one book, you can kind of check this to make sure your model's good. It would be what? Well, it would be 4.9 times 1. X is our input, right? That's our number of books we want to produce. So it would be $220.50 plus $4.90, right, to produce one book. Okay, so that's kind of one way you can kind of check to see that your model is correct. And again, stylistically, different ways you can write this. You could even write your linear model this way. You could say total cost to produce books is equal to 4.9 times the number of books plus 220.5, or you could write a nice linear equation like this. You're just going to have to define what y and x are. So, or you could even use kind of a function notation like f of x. Okay, so again, different ways you could do this. And of course, I can't look at your actual results right now, but you have to be the judge whether in fact you answer this correctly. Okay, now once we have our linear model here, okay, our linear function, then we can answer the rest of these questions pretty easily. So let's go to move on to part B. So part B says how much to produce 500 books. Okay, so what's our input? Our input is going to be 500, right? And then when we plug in 500 for x into this linear function, it's going to give us our total cost. So it's pretty simple. This is how we use our linear model. So we're going to plug in 500. That's the number of books we want to order up and produce. So what's the cost there? Well, it's going to be 500 times 4.9, which is 2,450 plus that initial setup cost of 220 and $220.50. So that total will be 2670.5. Okay, so that's how we get to this answer. Now, a lot of you could probably just reason through this and be like, oh, I don't need that linear model to figure this out. I could have just, looked at the information and, and figure, was able to get the correct answer. Now, if you got the correct answer, that's great. However, if you got it without the linear model, then you're kind of doing it partially correct. Okay, you still need to be able to write linear models because there's a lot more to this topic. In terms of like a linear regression. I don't want to kind of get into more advanced topics, but you have to still be able to construct a linear model. Okay, so let's take a look at this last question here. So it says, how many books can be made if you have a $700 budget for this process, right? So to answer this question, $700 is what? Well, that's how much we have to spend. That's our budget. So we're going to solve for X this time. We want to know how many books. Okay, so X is the missing variable. Now, the previous problem, X was our input. That was the number of books that we wanted to produce, and we wanted to know the total cost. Here, it's different. We know our total cost, okay, our budget here. We want to know how many books can we make with this total cost, $700. So we're going to plug in 700 for Y and solve for X. Okay, so when we do this, you can see the algebra here. So we have 700 equal to 4.9x plus 220.5. So I want to subtract 220.5 from both sides of the equation. I get 479.5 is equal to 4.9x. So I'm going to solve for x by dividing both sides of the equation by 4.9. And what do I get? Well, I get x is approximately equal to 97.85, on and on and on. Okay, that's a decimal continues on. So, we are talking about number of books. Well, I'm pretty sure someone is going to say, well, listen, if you give me $700, I will give you 97.85 of a book, right? They're not going to say, here is your book, and here is the 0.85 of this book. We'll just kind of cut some of the pages off. So you're not going to be able to afford to get that 98th copy, right? So we got this 0.85, that's not enough. So we're going to have to round down and call it 97. Okay, so again, pretty typical type of problem. In terms of level of difficulty, I would say this is like maybe a 3 out of 10. Not too difficult, but it wasn't designed to be an overly challenging problem. It's really kind of a quick example problem to remind you that you need to understand linear functions, linear models. This is absolutely, kind of critical concepts that you must learn in algebra. So if you need help with this stuff, I do have additional videos on my YouTube channel that relates to these topics. But really, we are talking about a lot of things like that can get more involved in these type of problems like scatter plots, linear regression, if you don't know what that is, slope, etc., etc. So if you want my best full instruction, you probably want to go to my Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 course. Okay? All right, so with that being said, I definitely wish you all the best in your mathematics adventures. Thank you for your time and have a great day.